only thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. We're in the middle of a three-part series on a convention of states. You can find out more by going to our website at wallbuilderslive.com. Click on the link and you can watch the entire webinar that we did with Mike Farris. Today we're catching the second part in the three-part series of that webinar, playing the audio for you. So we're going to pick up right where we left off yesterday. Here's David Barton, myself, Rick Green, and special guest Mike Farris.
Who cares if George Soros wants to have the convention? That's fine. That doesn't back us off in any way. So get rid of the fear stuff. And so much of the argument you hear is what if, and it could be, and it might happen. Yeah, and it might have a blizzard in Texas on the 14th of July, and we might get hit by a meteor tomorrow at noon. Don't worry about the what ifs. Don't get the fear stuff. Go on the offense with this stuff, and it's time to go on the offensive and get our federal government back.
Absolutely. Mike, I'll throw a technical question at you first, and then we'll get to some strategy questions that we've received. This one's actually a Twitter question from Kit1288. Do the states have to ratify exactly what comes out of the convention, or can they ratify separate parts of what comes from the convention?
It will be just like the Bill of Rights. There will, under our application, which is basically the same approach as Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, there can be, 3 to 7 to 8 to 10 amendments, something like that. And just like the original Bill of Rights, when 12 amendments were sent out and 10 were initially ratified, we can do the same things. The states will vote yes or no on each of the proposed amendments. So if there's a balanced budget amendment, a term limits amendment, an amendment that reins in the Supreme Court, an amendment that takes away the ability to make treaties that control domestic policy of the United States, let's say 7, 8 amendments like that, the states will have, 38 states will have to agree on those amendments one by one.
Okay, so then let's take that to a strategy question in terms of how to have this convention and what would be covered. We had several questions on this. I'll try to summarize a couple of them real quick here. One's from Mike, one's from Charles. Essentially, they're asking why have a single issue application instead of specific amendments that are adopted by the states and that they say to the convention you can only adopt these specific amendments instead of a topic. So what's the strategy behind making it open to a topic itself? Well,
there's a real legal question whether or not states can ahead of time write the text and bind the convention to exact text. There is no doubt that the states can bind their delegates to discuss only the issues that are before them. The 3 topics that we laid out. You can make the delegates stick to the agenda, but as a practical matter, you're going to want to write something that's going to pass in 38 states. And so if we're only going to do one, let's take the balanced budget. If we're going to only do a balanced budget, let's say it takes 7 to 10 years to get that through. But we need not only a balanced budget, but we also need limitations on taxing. We need limitations on spending. We need to stop the misuse of regulations. We need to take away the ability of the general welfare clause to force programs like Obamacare down our throat. If we're going to fix the general problem with the federal government having too much power, we don't have 10 and 20 years to do it one at a time. It's going to take, let's say, 7 years in a best case scenario to get this done. At the end of 7 years from now, I want to have a solution to a bunch of problems, not just one, and then we start over. I don't think the country has that long, and the people won't get excited about a single thing. Politics is coalition, and if people see, well, my favorite thing is going to move forward, and 4 or 5 other things that I kind of like are moving forward, you can build coalitions around those kind of plans.
Yeah.
Really hard to get grassroots momentum around a single issue. The balanced budget is an idea that's been around for 40 years. We've never been able to get to 34 states because there's not enough grassroots momentum behind that single idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good strategy. Dave?
Yeah, let me add what Mike was saying, too, because when the thing about limiting, the states can control their delegations, but the content of the amendment is a real question, as Mike said. Go back to the original Bill of Rights, as Mike pointed out, because he talked about the ratification process. But when they got together to frame the original Bill of Rights, as I recall, there were, I think, 7 or 8 states that had their proposals for the Bill of Rights or amendments. One state, I think, had eight amendments they wanted, and one state had 19. So they got together and they worked it out into the 12 that they sent to the states. Some of them covered the same issues. Some of them didn't cover the same issues. And yet, even though one state may have raised one issue, the other state said, we didn't think about that. That's really good. And it got ratified in the Bill of Rights. So when you get them into that room, if you bind them down with a particular language, you really limit yourself. This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Crime is one of America's most serious problems today. Its effects reach not only the direct victims of its violence, but even those who have not been attacked. The concern for crime has not been limited to this century, however. Our founding fathers were also concerned about it. Yet the effects of crime unquestionably were much less in their generation. So what was their deterrent to crime? Signer of the Constitution, James McHenry, answered that question. He explained, "The Holy Scriptures can alone secure to society order and peace. In vain, without the Bible, we increase penal laws and draw protections around our institutions. Bibles are strong defenses. Where they abound, men cannot pursue wicked courses." Founding Father James McHenry believed that widely teaching the Bible was the best means to deter crime.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
When Oklahoma passed the American Law for American Courts Act there, it got struck down real quickly. But the other states looked at that and said, no, we could have written the language a whole lot tighter, a whole lot better. And so it's gone through the other states.
And they've been able to fix it and
they've
make it
been
better.
able to fix it because they changed the language. So if they had taken Oklahoma's language and gone to the convention with that and said, here's what we're going to pass, and the other states said, no, we got better language, and Oklahoma said, oh, we didn't see that. And that's why you want that input of having these folks there to be able to say, yeah, that is a better suggestion than what we had. It still gets the same heart of the content, but it makes it so much tighter when you have the experience of other people and other delegates in other states there. And as Mike said, you can build a coalition because, some states wanted the Second Amendment, a big thing in theirs, and others wanted religious liberty and freedom of conscience, and others wanted no pay raises for congressmen. Well, once you got them into that Bill of Rights, those 12 things, 10 of them got ratified because they built a coalition around those multiple things. And like Mike said, you cannot do this in 10 separate constitutional meetings. You can't have a convention of states 10 times. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, got an email question here from Jones. She said, Congress and the President don't follow our Constitution now. Why do you think they would follow new amendments? And actually, she does ask, why not use nullification? She says it's provided for in the Constitution. David and I have done several programs on that. We don't agree with that. We're not for nullification when you think it's unconstitutional. But rather than getting down that rabbit trail, why do you think that they would follow any amendments that came out of a convention of states?
Well, there's two constitutions. It's not exactly accurate. I mean, while I agree with the sentiment of this person, it's not exactly accurate to say that they don't follow the Constitution. They follow the wrong Constitution. They're following the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Rather than the Constitution as written. And so, I mean, once in a while the Supreme Court gets it right. The recent Second Amendment cases by the Supreme Court are pretty much dead on. Many of the Fourth Amendment cases of the Supreme Court, not all of them, but many of them are right on. They're right in square with original intent. And so there are other things that we get right. But there's a few important things that we're getting really wrong. The General Welfare Clause, the Commerce Clause, and the other things. And if we rewrite the General Welfare Clause rather than saying general welfare, which gives them the idea that they have broad language that gives them a lot of flexibility, if it says the federal government cannot spend money on any topic for which the states are jurisdictionally competent to spend money, the General Welfare Clause goes away. I mean, the problems with it go away. And if Commerce Clause is restated as the United States Congress, under the Commerce Clause, has the power to regulate shipping and nothing else. Most of the problems that we have with the Commerce Clause go away. And so it's really the Supreme Court you got to aim at. The Supreme Court does follow constitutional amendments, usually for a long time. And let's say, we put this in, we fix the Commerce Clause, we fix the General Welfare Clause, and 50, 75, 100 years from now, the Supreme Court starts to stray. Well, two things. First, we've had 50 to 75 years of good government. That's a big thing. We did a good thing by stopping runaway spending for the next 50 to 75 years. Secondly, we have taught America that they can use this process. And so if Washington, D.C. ever dares to start building its power again, we can do the process a second time 20 or 30 years from now, and we'll fix it again. By having this power, it will change everything in Washington, D.C. If Washington, D.C. is afraid of the states and afraid of the people, Washington, D.C. changes forever.
So if I'm understanding you right, I like how you said that there's basically two constitutions out there. There's the real Constitution and the original intent of the Constitution, and then there's this interpreted Constitution by the court. So a congressman can stand up and say, well, I'm following the Constitution because I'm doing what the court said the Constitution says. And what you're saying is a convention of states gives us a chance to redefine, or really go back to the original definition, make it clear in the Constitution that that's the original definition, and they have to start over with their misinterpretations, and that could take 50 years because, like you said, they will tend to follow that amendment for decades before you start seeing them make it what Jefferson said, wax in their hands.
That's exactly right. And one of the amendments that we certainly need to address is changing the nature of the Supreme Court so that it no longer has no realistic check and balance on it. There are a number of good ideas out there. Mark Levin has proposed some ideas that are sound and are worthy of investigation. My idea on how to fix the Supreme Court is kind of an ironic thing. The court has fallen in love with international law. And so I have a degree in public international law from the University of London. I wanted to be able to fight UN treaties on a more effective basis. So I went and got a lot of opposition research and got an LLM in the process. And the European Court of Human Rights gives us a really good idea of how to fix the U.S. Supreme Court. That court has 46 countries. They have 46 judges. Every country appoints one judge for a limited time, and they sit in panels of 9 normally. Now, they do have a procedure that in rare cases, all 46 judges can participate in writing in a case, and there's no reason we can't do that for the Supreme Court. Have the states appoint 50 judges. You draw up panels of 9, you hear most cases, 50 judges in writing can review exceptional cases. But if you have state-appointed judges for 8 years and no longer where Justice Kennedy is controlling everything in the country because one man swings everything, this nation changes radically, and the Supreme Court becomes what the founders intended in the first place, and that is the least dangerous branch of government.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Around 1790, the infamous Thomas Paine wrote his Age of Reason, attacking religion and Christianity. Interestingly, one of the strongest defenders against Paine's attack was Benjamin Franklin. In fact, he stiffly rebuked Paine and told him, "He that spits in the wind spits in his own face." Do you imagine any good would be done by this attack against religion? Think how great a portion of mankind consists of youth who have need of the motives of religion to restrain them from vice, to support their virtue. I would advise you not to attempt unchaining the tiger, but to burn this piece before it is seen by any other person. If men are so wicked with religion, what would they be if without it? Benjamin Franklin believed that the practice of religion was one of the greatest assets of American society.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Twitter question here for you from Paul. Who chooses the delegates? I think the correct term if I learned it right from you, as commissioners. Is that correct? And he also said, I live in New York and don't want only New York City delegates sent to the convention. So who gets to choose?
Well, in New York, the Senate is Republican, as David has noted earlier. The House is Democrat. They're going to have to work together and appoint the delegates from New York. The legislature in every state appoints the delegates, and so they will. The recommendation is they appoint a relatively low odd number, but the states can choose whatever they want. If they want to appoint 11, they can appoint 11. If they want 3, they can appoint 3. My own recommendation is they appoint 7 or 9, but they caucus on every vote, and it's one state, one vote. And so, but again, a majority of the states in this country are controlled by Republicans. 28 states, if you count Nebraska, and so the Republicans' state legislatures will appoint delegates, and so we walk in with a majority of Republican votes on day one. And as long as the Republicans hold steady, nothing crazy can happen. Maybe they won't send people that are conservative enough to fix everything we want to fix. Maybe we'll get 75% or 85% of the ideal, but I would rather, get some good amendments out.
Yeah.
We're going to get some good amendments. We may not get everything, but the chances of a bad amendment are 0.
Well, and let me ask this of both of you guys, Mike and David. Have you noticed a change out there? Not just in folks like us that live, breathe, and eat this stuff, but are you sensing an attitude change towards a convention of states? Are people more willing to have one? They understand we're at the precipice. I mean, have you seen over the last year any difference in their attitudes?
Let me take that first shot. I can tell you what I see. It's a whole lot like Common Core. I think the poll this week, 42% of people don't have a clue what Common Core is. Now, of those who have a clue, they've got pretty definite opinions.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm seeing is a whole lot of folks don't know what a convention of states is, but I can tell you that 3 years ago, 95% of the people I talked to were absolutely adamantly opposed to it, regardless. And I would say that right now, I'm probably hearing 65% of people supporting the idea of a convention of the states. Yeah. So among those who seem to know something, it is definitely moving in a different direction over the last 3 years. But I think still, from my vantage point, most people don't know what it is because, again, we talk about this on the program, but in the election of 2012, 70% of the nation who voted did not know the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. 65% did not know the role of judges, and 62% of voters could not name the 3 branches of government. So if you can't name the 3 branches of government, you probably have never heard of Article 5. You don't even know how many articles there are. But of those who have heard, there is a definite swing happening, as evidenced by the fact that state legislatures are now voting on this. When that hadn't happened in a bunch of years.
Yeah, Mike, that's kind of what I've seen as well. And when I started my Constitution classes 4 or 5 years ago, almost everybody in the room was against it, and it seemed like I was the only one advocating for it. And I had just begun to be for. Actually, it's probably only 3 years ago, really, when that started. Yeah. And then, in the last year, I've seen that swing from nobody for it in those classes to half the room being for it, and now about 6. I think your number's right. Mike, what are you seeing around the country?
Well, I see the same thing. The swing is all dramatically in the direction of favoring this for 2 reasons. One is people are starting to learn the history of Article 5 more effectively, more accurately. And then secondly, people are recognizing how bad the situation is. There's an appropriate reluctance of the American public to want to amend the Constitution about anything.
Yeah.
And so, but people are saying, look, with Obamacare, with the NSA spying on everybody, with all the stuff, the IRS destroying their records, if one of us destroyed our hard drives in the middle of an audit, we'd go to jail. And they just see a criminal government out there, and people are saying this is time to do something, and they realize the founders are doing it. Now, some of the best evidence of the change of public opinion is right there in Texas. The Republican Party of Texas just a couple of weeks ago adopted a pro-Convention of the States platform, whereas the last Texas platform had a plank in opposition to a constitutional convention. Now, that's an important lesson, actually. The plank against the constitutional convention is still in the Texas platform. I'm against a constitutional convention because what a constitutional convention is, you're writing it all over and you're not using Article 5 and you're not bound by the rules of Article 5. This isn't that. This is not a constitutional convention. People who say it's a con don't know their history and don't know the text of the Constitution. This is a convention of the states. That's the historically accurate term from the very first application under Article 5 made by Virginia in November of 1788. And so we know for a fact that these are distinct, different animals. They're under the rules of Article 5, and it's safe, it's effective, and the public is coming our way.
Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
One of our email questions said, I hope you'll address what Mark Levin has presented as his solution via Article 5, the pros and the cons. And I do want to mention his book, Liberty Amendments. You mentioned it earlier. I think it's one of the most important books of our lifetimes, really, if we want to save the Republic. He really lays it out well. And our question is, do you think there will eventually be a unified action or front, certainly from those that advocate for this and for conservatives? And they also asked, there are some folks out there who have been very critical of the plan, obviously John Birch Society and some of those, Chris Ann Hall and others. Mike, I'll just throw out there, I think some people enjoy just being against and it maybe gives them a platform. And so they maybe have a knee-jerk reaction to this rather than really studying it and really looking at how important it is. So we're not going to get everybody on board with this, are we?
Right. No, we're not, but we're seeing if you just look at the momentum of conservative leaders and see where we are, David Barton, you and me, we're three conservative leaders. Glenn Beck has joined our ranks. There are
Sarah Palin.
Of course, Sarah Palin has joined. Alan West has joined our ranks. Mike Huckabee, U.S. Senator Tom Coburn. Many other people are starting. The momentum is all in one direction, and the only national leaders of any import that are against us really is Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis is a wonderful woman. She's been in this position for 40 years. She also argues that the Constitution was illegally adopted. I don't agree with that. I think the Constitution was lawfully adopted, and that historical mistake, I think, has led my dear, wonderful friend Phyllis to reach a wrong conclusion. In a 50-year career of absolute perfection, she's entitled to one mistake.
That's right. We love her too. Believe it.
That's right.
I love her. Phyllis is wonderful, but we need to get the history right, and we're going in the right direction.
Hey, and Mike, if I'm going to interrupt you just for 1 second before you leave Phyllis, because one of our questions actually hits that, and they said, I love Eagle Forum, but Phyllis really hated the idea of a convention of the states when the ERA amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment, was out there. Do you think that's why her animosity for convention of states is so high?
Not really. Those are
Really?
two different issues.
Okay.
The ERA didn't come through the convention of the states. The ERA came from the permanent constitutionally amending convention that sits in Washington, D.C. called Congress. Every single day, they have the power to propose any amendment they want on any subject they want. And the reason they don't send out crazier ideas than they do is because they know 38 states will defeat them. If they thought they could get away with repealing the Second Amendment, there have been times in recent years where there was 2/3 majority of both houses of Congress where they would send that out and try it. But they know political reality, and they're not going to waste their time doing something nutso because they know that the states will kill it. And so but Phyllis's objection to the ERA, because I was there, I helped her. I litigated against the misuse of the process on the Equal Rights Amendment. Phyllis and I traveled together in the late 1970s, working on that side by side. And she and I both were against the ERA on substantive grounds, that we thought that our law should allow for differences between men and women. One of the arguments we made is if you do this, it's going to lead to homosexual marriage. And people laughed at us. Homosexual marriage, that's the craziest idea in the world. Well, it turns out we weren't so crazy after all. But those are two different things.
Out of time for today, folks. That was Mike Farris with David and myself on a live webinar. And if you missed it, it's actually kind of cool. That was the first one we've done. We'd like to do some more. You can find out more about topics we're going to have coming up and also get the video of that particular webinar that we did with Mike Farris. And tomorrow we're going to get the conclusion of the audio here. So if you just tuned in today and you're kind of lost figuring out what is this about, go to our website, wallbuilderslive.com, and you can get yesterday's program and today's program, and then tomorrow you'll be able to get the conclusion of that 3-part series, which was from the live webinar we did with Mike Farris. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided forever.